Have you ever wondered if modern science might actually have a huge blind spot when it comes to the very origins of the universe? Well, welcome to today's Explainer. We're going to dive right into a source text that is highly contrarian, sharply critical, and honestly asks some incredibly uncomfortable questions about the current scientific consensus. We're unpacking an argument that challenges the foundational assumptions of materialistic science, touching on everything from biology to the philosophical direction of human progress. Now, my goal today isn't to take a side, but rather to neutrally guide you through this argument step by step so you can understand the exact case this source is building.
So here's our roadmap for this breakdown. First, we'll look at the great paradox of science. Then we'll get into the cosmos and multiverse theories. Third, the totally unlikely mathematics of biology. Fourth, we'll examine the materialistic paradigm. And finally, transhumanism and the serpent's lie. Let's get into it.
Okay, kicking things off with part 1, the great paradox of science. The whole core of this source material rests on this alleged massive tension between measurable physical evidence and, well, untestable theoretical frameworks that mainstream science relies on. On one side, side A, the text points to what it calls the fingerprints of intelligent design. Think about DNA. The source describes it as a digital information code that is way more advanced and compact than literally any software humanity has ever programmed. It also points to the extreme fine-tuning of the universe's natural constants, where if just one tiny variable was off, life couldn't exist. To the source, these are the clear, measurable fingerprints of a creator. But then, look at side B. The text argues that to avoid that logical conclusion, modern science has kind of invented what it calls fantasies. We're talking about theories like the multiverse, a Big Bang singularity where nothing suddenly became everything, or even moving the goalposts to suggest advanced aliens seeded life on Earth. The text points out quite sharply that even if aliens did seed life, well, who created the aliens, right? It just pushes the problem further back. So the overarching claim here is that science is basically accepting untested fantasies just to reject the most logical explanation, an intelligent creator outside of time and space.
Moving right along to part 2, the cosmos and multiverse theories.
Let's zoom in on that idea of the cosmos and this intense fine-tuning. To scientifically explain away this perfect tuning without a creator, physicists often lean on string theory and the anthropic principle, which is essentially the idea that the universe has to look this perfectly tuned simply because we are here to observe it. But here's where the source gets really critical. To make the math work without a designer, these models propose a minimum of 10 to the power of 500 different invisible universes. Think about that for a second. That is a 1 followed by 500 zeros. It's completely mind-boggling.
And honestly, it actually gets even wilder. Some calculations push that estimate to roughly 10 billion million universes. Just try to wrap your head around that absurd scale. We know of exactly one universe for sure, right? Yet to avoid a creator, this perspective suggests the prevailing paradigm requires an unfathomable amount of unobservable universes. And the source points out that critics within the physics community itself, people like Sabine Hossenfelder and Roger Penrose, argue that this massive mathematical leap crosses the line from real science straight into pseudoscientific science fiction. It's seen as just special pleading to protect a secular framework.
So it all boils down to this really sharp rhetorical question posed by the text. Why do we accept an utterly untestable multiverse filled with invisible realities, but completely reject the idea of a creator as unscientific?
That brings us to part 3, the unlikely mathematics of biology.
Okay, so just as the universe looks incredibly fine-tuned, the origin of life itself presents this equally massive statistical hurdle. According to our source, your standard protein is made up of about 300 to 400 amino acids. Well, the chance of just one functional protein forming through pure, random chemistry? The text notes it's calculated to be somewhere between 1 in 10 to the 77th power and 1 in 10 to the 164th power. To put that into perspective, mathematically speaking, that is indistinguishable from zero. Literally zero chance. And scientists cited in the material like Stephen Meyer, James Tour, and Michael Denton emphasize that these absolutely staggering odds are a massive, massive problem for materialistic explanations of how life began.
And keep in mind, one single protein isn't even close to enough. To get even a minimal, self-replicating cell, you don't just need one lucky protein, you need hundreds of them, all working together perfectly. You need the DNA and RNA encoding, you need a functional cell membrane, and you need the actual mechanism to self-replicate. It's like a giant puzzle. The argument here is that even if you had all the time and all the matter in the entire universe, the probability is still astronomically low. Yet, the dominant scientific stance remains that, well, it must have happened naturally, basically choosing virtually impossible odds over even considering intelligent design.
Let's move to part 4, the materialistic paradigm.
So you might be wondering, if the math is so impossibly stacked against random evolution, why does the scientific establishment hold on to these theories so tightly? Well, the source blames something called methodological naturalism. It defines this as an absolute rule in modern science that pre-excludes any possibility of a creator right by default. Under this rule, only natural explanations are permitted. Period. It doesn't matter how statistically improbable or mathematically absurd they become. According to the critique, funding, career advancement, and academic prestige, they only reward those who strictly operate within this secular, materialistic framework.
What's really fascinating here is the historical contrast the source draws. Think about the absolute titans of historical science, people like Isaac Newton, Johannes Kepler, James Clerk Maxwell. They didn't view their scientific discoveries as disproving God. It was actually the exact opposite. They viewed their science as the very means of understanding God's creation. But contrast that with modern scientific institutions today. The source argues they have abandoned this worldview entirely, driven instead by a secular ideology that's just disguised as pure objectivity.
And that leads us to our final section, Part 5, Transhumanism and the Serpent's Lie.
Here's where the source shifts from the math and the institutions into a deep philosophical climax. The text fully acknowledges the incredible, almost godlike power humanity has achieved recently. I mean, we're talking about transhumanism, artificial intelligence, genetic manipulation with tools like CRISPR, and the active pursuit of eternal life through tech. But rather than celebrating these as great triumphs of human ingenuity, the source looks at them through a deeply skeptical lens. It suggests that humanity is essentially attempting to seize total biological control, to effectively become gods ourselves.
And this brings us to the source's central biblical thesis. It quotes Genesis, "You will not certainly die. You will be like God, knowing good and evil." The text points out this profound irony, that the ultimate goals of modern transhumanism directly mirror that original temptation by the serpent. The promise of not dying, the promise of seizing total control. The argument is that in our modern zeal to be smarter than the Creator, humanity has actually become spiritually blind to the literal fingerprints of design staring us right in the face, from the microscopic code inside our DNA to the impossibly fine-tuned universe.
Which brings us to the final, lingering thought the source leaves us with. True wisdom begins with the realization that we are not accidents in a meaningless universe. It's absolutely a provocative conclusion to a highly critical argument. Are we stubbornly clinging to fantasies of infinite multiverses and random chemistry just to avoid a divine reality? Or is science merely following the natural evidence wherever it leads? It forces us to ask, what do you choose to believe about your own origins? Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer.